Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space.
So, I want you to just take a second and picture the most popular municipal park in your city.
Yeah, you probably see it as like a sanctuary, right?
Exactly. A deliberate pause in the urban grid, the place where the asphalt finally stops, the noise kind of dampens down, and you can just engage with this neutral patch of nature.
Right. It presents itself as this incredibly simple public good.
Yeah.
Just a space existing purely for your recreation and, well, your well-being.
But the thing is, when you actually apply the analytical frameworks of, say, macroeconomics or urban planning or even behavioral psychology to that exact same space,
The whole illusion of neutrality completely vanishes.
totally vanishes. That peaceful park bench you're picturing, it's actually sitting right in the center of a highly contested ideological battleground.
Yeah, every detail is contested. The physical layout of the trees, the maintenance schedules, the actual regulations governing, like who is allowed to sit on that bench and for how long.
Right. All of those elements are dictated by these massive, unseen economic forces and really complex human behavioral patterns.
We are looking at environments where basically global economic theories are dictating the physical reality of a single blade of grass.
Which is wild. And at the exact same time, the behavioral friction of just one single individual can completely derail an entire municipal ecological initiative.
Yeah, which perfectly defines our mission for this deep dive today.
Right. We are exploring the hidden architecture of our urban environments, specifically through the lens of feminist and intersectional design, and looking at the psychology of our own eco-behaviors within those spaces.
We're essentially bridging the really massive, systemic, macro-level theories of city planning with the highly localized micro-level reality of, why you might fail to execute a simple environmental task.
Like just remembering to put your recycling bin out on the curb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to navigate all this, we are pulling from two really specific, highly detailed academic sources.
The first one is this really fascinating 2025 paper by Jakub Cronenberg. It was published in the journal Cities.
Yeah, and it offers a deep theoretical critique of how we manage urban green spaces. It basically contrasts the dominant neoliberal approach with this radical degrowth movement.
And then, to kind of ground that really broad theoretical framework in actual empirical behavioral data, our second source is a rigorous 2026 experimental study.
Right, published in World Development by Hannah Furman-Riebel and her colleagues.
They conducted this incredibly localized field experiment in Lima, Peru, testing the exact psychological mechanics of habit formation.
Using SMS text reminders to influence household recycling rates, which we will get deep into later. It's so interesting.
It really is. But before we actually start dissecting the text, I feel like we really need to set a crucial ground rule, specifically for our discussion of Cronenberg's paper.
Yes, absolutely. We need to establish the analytical parameters here.
Because the text operates within a highly politicized academic framework. I mean, the author explicitly critiques neoliberal capitalism.
Right, and advocates for paradigms like eco-socialism, decolonization, and degrowth.
And obviously, those are heavily loaded, politically charged terms. So we want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that our role today is purely analytical.
Exactly. We are entirely impartial here. We are unpacking these concepts to help you understand the current debates happening right now in ecological economics and urban planning.
Right. We are not endorsing or validating the author's political positions, and we aren't taking an oppositional right-wing stance against them either. We're not taking sides.
Our job is simply to impartially report on the content provided. We're mapping the territory for you so you can understand the arguments.
We are mapping the territory, not planting a flag. I like that. So, with that said, let's zoom way out and start by examining the macro-level landscape that Cronenberg presents.
Okay, so the foundation of his whole argument relies on rejecting the standard term for our current geological epoch,
The Anthropocene.
right, the Anthropocene.
Yeah.
He rejects that in favor of what he drawing on scholars like Jason W. Moore terms, the Capitalocene or the Econocene.
And this linguistic shift is really crucial to the whole thesis of the paper, isn't it?
It is, because the term Anthropocene implies that humanity as a whole, just the human species generically, is responsible for the current state of planetary ecological disruption.
Like it's just human nature to destroy the environment.
Exactly. But the Capitalocene framework argues that this diffuses the responsibility way too broadly.
Right. It posits that it is not human nature driving ecological change, but rather a very specific, historically situated economic system.
A system focused entirely on endless capital accumulation. And in this view, urban nature is entirely subsumed by economic logic.
So the natural environment is basically stripped of its intrinsic value and converted into a commodity.
Totally. I mean, think about it. If you look at standard municipal accounting today, a tree is rarely valued for just simply being a tree.
Right. It's quantified as natural capital.
Yes, natural capital providing ecosystem services. Urban planners literally calculate the exact monetary value of the stormwater that a specific tree absorbs.
Or like the cooling effect its canopy provides to nearby office buildings, which reduces their air conditioning costs.
Exactly. It's an entirely utilitarian, financialized framework.
And that utilitarian framework drives what the paper identifies as the green growth machine.
Which is such a great term. Under neoliberal urban governance, the development and maintenance of green spaces are frequently justified and funded only when they align with broader economic development goals.
Parks become these tools for green boosterism.
Right. A municipality will invest heavily in this highly manicured, visually spectacular green space because it serves as a branding mechanism.
It signals to global capital that the city is competitive, that it's modern and attractive.
And it's designed to attract a very specific demographic. The text references the creative class.
Oh, right. Tech professionals, high-income earners, corporate headquarters. It's like when a trendy new artisanal coffee shop moves into a neighborhood.
Exactly. It looks great, it has a great vibe, but it accidentally or intentionally prices out the locals.
The park is basically an amenity engineered to increase the location's desirability, which subsequently drives up real estate values and property tax revenues for the city.
Which introduces the core structural critique in the paper, which is the phenomenon of green gentrification.
This is huge. When a city develops a high-end green amenity in a historically disinvested area, the intended economic uplift almost always results in the displacement of the existing residents.
We see this documented extensively in urban studies. And if we look at it through a class and racial justice lens, the impact is staggering.
Yeah, let's look at the High Line in New York City as a parallel example of this mechanism. It transformed an abandoned, elevated railway into this stunning linear park.
And on an ecological and architectural level, it is a triumph.
Yeah.
Right? It's beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the economic radiation from that park caused property values in the immediate vicinity to hyperinflate overnight.
Right. The working class communities, the small industrial businesses, and the lower income residents who historically occupied West Chelsea, they just couldn't absorb the ensuing rent hikes.
Or the property tax assessments. The green space literally acted as a catalyst for their removal.
And the Cronenberg text applies an intersectional lens to this dynamic, noting that the displacement disproportionately affects marginalized groups.
Yeah, analyzing it specifically through vectors of class, race, and migration status.
In the Global South, this manifests really aggressively. Informal settlements are frequently targeted for demolitions specifically to make way for official branded eco-developments.
Which is such a brutal irony. The populations who suffer from the highest deficits of green space are the very populations displaced when that green space is finally developed.
Because the space is optimized for exchange value rather than use value for the people already living there.
It really highlights how urban design can enforce systemic racism and classism without ever explicitly stating it. And the paper also details a phenomenon called urban green grabbing.
Oh, this part is structurally fascinating.
It really is. It's this process where developers will acquire informal, perhaps unmanaged or overgrown green spaces.
Spaces that, frankly, actually possess really high biodiversity despite their unkempt appearance.
Right, like vacant lots that have grown wild. And the developers pave them over to construct luxury, quote-unquote, green architecture.
The contradiction there is just stark. They'll build a high-density luxury apartment complex and market it as eco-friendly because,
Right.
it features a manicured green roof.
Or like energy-efficient appliances.
Yeah. But the net ecological result of the development is a massive reduction in total vegetative cover and soil permeability.
The paper explicitly characterizes this as a form of greenwashing. The system destroys functional, complex ecosystems to construct these commodified, simplified simulations of nature.
Simulations that can be easily monetized. And
Yeah.
then once these high-value commodified green spaces are established, they obviously require protection.
Which leads to what the paper calls new enclosures. This is a historical callback to the enclosure of the agricultural commons, right?
Exactly. To protect the perceived value of the park and ensure it remains attractive to that target demographic we talked about, the creative class municipalities implement defensive architecture.
And really strict behavioral regulations. These enclosures are both physical and administrative.
You see the installation of wrought iron fences with locked gates that operate on really strict schedules.
You see the deployment of private security personnel, pervasive CCTV surveillance, and in some global contexts, they even charge direct entrance fees.
And if we view this through, say, a queer theory or a racial justice perspective, it becomes a highly curated environment designed for exclusion.
Totally. The regulations are designed to filter out behaviors and populations that disrupt the pristine aesthetic of the green growth machine.
Unhoused individuals, teenagers congregating, informal street vendors, or even just non-normative uses of the space, they are systematically excluded and policed.
This space just ceases to function as a public commons. It starts operating more like an outdoor lobby for the surrounding luxury real estate.
And from the perspective of feminist geography and the whole concept of designing a truly liberated feminist park, this model relies on deeply patriarchal and colonial mechanisms of control.
Right. The surveillance, the rigid zoning of behavior, it dictates exactly how the space can be interacted with, criminalizing any deviation from just passive, consumer-oriented recreation.
Which brings us to arguably the most potent and definitely the most memorable physical manifestation of this management style discussed in the text.
The leaf blower.
Yes, the leaf blower. The author uses it as the ultimate avatar of neoliberal park consumption.
Let's really break down the mechanics of why the leaf blower is so problematic within this framework, because I think everyone listening has been annoyed by one.
Oh, definitely. So in a natural ecosystem, a tree sheds leaves to decompose, build soil humus, and return nitrogen and carbon to the root system.
It is a perfect closed-loop ecological cycle.
Right. But in the commodified park, a layer of dead leaves on the turf is categorized as an aesthetic failure.
It reads as unmanaged or messy.
Exactly. It shatters the illusion of the park as this static, pristine, finished product. Therefore, the natural process of decay is treated as an operational problem.
A problem that requires a high-energy technological intervention.
And the intervention is ecologically disastrous. The standard two-stroke gasoline leaf blower is incredibly inefficient.
It burns fossil fuels, it emits severe localized air pollution, and the high decibel noise pollution is it's awful.
It disrupts both human well-being and actual avian communication networks. Birds can't hear each other.
Wow. And furthermore, by stripping all the organic matter from the surface, the machine actively degrades the soil biology.
It destroys the mycorrhizal fungal networks and the habitat for overwintering pollinators.
Then the resulting environment is just this sterilized, nutrient-depleted patch of non-native turf grass.
And because the soil is functionally dead, the grass cannot survive naturally, which necessitates the next phase of economic throughput.
The municipal purchase and application of synthetic, petroleum-based fertilizers and chemical pesticides.
It is an entirely engineered dependency.
The pursuit of a specific visual aesthetic generates this endless cycle of fossil fuel consumption, chemical runoff, and precarious, often low-wage labor to operate the machinery.
It maximizes economic throughput while actively diminishing ecological health. It's an endless loop.
Okay, so having established this pretty scathing critique of the neoliberal model, Cronenberg pivots to present the alternative, the radical counterargument.
Right. The degrowth alternative.
The paper defines degrowth not merely as like an economic recession, but as a deliberate structural transition away from growth-dependent paradigms.
The core premise, and again, we're just presenting the author's argument here, is that infinite material and economic expansion is biophysically impossible on a planet with finite resources.
So the proposed alternative prioritizes human and ecological well-being over GDP accumulation.
It advocates for a society built on autonomy, care, sufficiency, democracy, and what the literature terms conviviality.
But I feel like we need to play devil's advocate here for the listener. The immediate friction point in the degrowth thesis, especially when applied to urban infrastructure, is the question of maintenance.
Oh, absolutely.
If a municipality radically reduces its maintenance budget, restricts the use of power equipment, and stops treating the park like a professional landscaping asset, doesn't the space just rapidly degrade into an unusable, hazardous, vacant lot?
Right. If you remove the municipal funding that pays the contractors who mow the lawns and empty the bins, how does the park actually function?
If degrowth just means stopping, it sounds like a recipe for urban blight. And historically, urban blight drives crime and lowers the quality of life for the residents left behind.
That is the standard pushback.
Eh.
But the author counters this by arguing that degrowth in urban nature is not defined by neglect. It's defined by a radical reorganization of labor and value.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
The primary mechanism proposed is co-production through the reclamation of the commons.
So rather than a municipality taxing residents to pay a private corporation to manage the park, the management of the space is localized.
Exactly. The citizens who utilize the space take direct, cooperative responsibility for its physical maintenance and its governance.
We see successful micro-examples of this, right? Like in community gardens or citizen-led permaculture plots?
Yes. The residents dictate what is planted, they perform the manual labor, and they share the harvest or the ecological benefits. It breaks the monopoly.
The text actually cites the philosopher Ivan Illich on this.
Yeah, specifically his critique of radical monopolies.
Illich argued that when a society relies entirely on institutionalized experts and industrial tools to meet basic needs, the individual loses the autonomy to care for themselves and their environment.
Right. And co-production is an attempt to break that monopoly, restoring agency and egalitarian access to the community level.
But, and I really want to challenge this, especially from an intersectional perspective, I'd argue there is a significant vulnerability in this model.
Let's unpack that.
Managing a complex urban ecosystem requires massive inputs of time, physical exertion, and organizational labor.
Definitely.
In a modern urban economy where individuals are already functioning under intensely high cognitive and economic loads, working multiple jobs, managing childcare mandating that they also manually maintain their local park seems highly impractical.
It does.
Who is actually performing this labor? Is it just going to fall on the people who already do the most unpaid work?
That is the structural vulnerability.
Right.
And the paper actually addresses it by integrating an eco-feminist economic critique.
Oh, this is right in line with the feminist park concept.
Exactly. Mainstream macroeconomics, specifically the framework of gross domestic product, GDP only, measures transactions that involve a monetary exchange.
It systematically excludes what feminist economists call social reproductive labor.
Right. This is the unpaid domestic work, the childcare, elder care, cooking, cleaning, and community organizing that has historically been heavily gendered and extracted without compensation.
The formal economy effectively sits on top of and is entirely subsidized by this invisible layer of unpaid reproductive care work.
If that labor ceased for even a week, the formal economy would collapse immediately.
And the Cronenberg text argues that the neoliberal city views the civic labor of maintaining a community garden through that exact same extractive lens.
Exactly. Municipalities under austerity measures often encourage volunteerism, not out of a genuine desire for community empowerment.
But simply to offload their maintenance costs onto unpaid citizens?
Yes. But the degrowth proposition is fundamentally different. It requires a societal restructuring where this ethics of care, both for human dependence and for local ecosystems, is actually recognized.
Structurally supported and valued as the core activity of a functioning society, rather than just a marginalized hobby that women are expected to do on the weekends.
It changes the paradigm of the park entirely. A feminist, decommodified park isn't just a space with equitable lighting and accessible pathways.
Though those are important. But wait, speaking of pathways, if we look at this through a disability justice perspective, how does a degrowth park maintain accessibility?
That's a really critical point.
Because if co-production just means letting the weeds take over, that park suddenly becomes completely inaccessible to wheelchair users or folks with mobility impairments. It can't just be rugged wilderness.
No, absolutely not. And this is where true co-production is vital. A degrowth park, managed by the community, means the community designs for its own needs.
Right, so instead of a private developer deciding what accessible means to check a compliance box, the disabled community members are actively involved in designing the space.
Exactly. Accessibility isn't an afterthought. It's an integral part of the ethics of care. You can have crushed stone paths that are permeable but wheelchair-friendly rather than just paving everything with concrete.
So tending to the soil and the space becomes the central relational activity that builds social cohesion across all demographics, rather than just a line item on a municipal budget.
And this ethics of care must cross species boundaries, too. The paper introduces the concept of multi-species justice, or decentering the human.
I'm fascinated by this concept. Let's look at the mechanism there. The traditional park is fiercely anthropocentric.
Oh, completely. Every sightline, every pathway, every single planting decision is optimized for human utility and human aesthetics.
But to achieve multi-species justice, design decisions must acknowledge the rights and the requirements of non-human urban inhabitants.
The soil microbiome, the native insect populations, the migratory birds.
So in practice, reducing throughput, what does a degrowth park actually look like?
It looks fundamentally different. It's a low-tech, low-throughput environment. Instead of vast, water-intensive, chemically treated lawns, you see the cultivation of dense microforests.
You see the tolerance or even the active encouragement of spontaneous vegetation.
Plants that the previous paradigm categorized as weeds because they provide critical forage for native pollinators.
The leaves are left in place to decompose. The aesthetic shifts from sterile control to ecological complexity.
It requires minimal financial capital and minimal fossil fuel input, relying instead on localized human attention and ecological timeframes.
Okay, so this presents a really compelling utopian theoretical vision. A localized, cooperative, low-throughput commons.
But, and this is a massive, but the execution of this vision relies on a highly precarious variable.
Human behavioral change.
Exactly. You need a critical mass of urban residents to actively, consistently perform pro-environmental behaviors.
Behaviors that require physical effort, require time, and yield no immediate personal financial reward.
You need to bridge the intention-action gap on a societal scale.
Which is the perfect transition from the macro theory of Cronenberg to the empirical micro-reality of the Furman-Riebel study in Peru.
Yes, we are moving from the philosophy of how people should act to the hard data of how they actually act.
And human behavior is notoriously stubborn. So let's establish the scene and the parameters of this second study.
The researchers conducted their field experiment in Miraflores, which is a municipality within the massive megacity of Lima, Peru.
And the environmental stakes here are absolutely critical. Lima generates over 8,400 tons of solid waste every single day.
And the formal recycling rate at the time of the study was a dismal 4%.
4%. That means 96% of that 8,400 tons is going straight to landfills or informal dump sites, generating severe methane emissions and soil contamination.
It's a massive crisis. So the municipal government of Miraflores attempted to address this by implementing a free, voluntary curbside recycling program.
And the specific cohort of households the researchers studied is really vital to understand here.
Right, these were not randomly selected residents who just woke up and had a recycling bin forced upon them.
The study focused specifically on households that had actively, voluntarily opted into the program.
They encountered a promotional campaign, maybe at a fair or online, or they got a phone call, and they took the deliberate step to register their address.
They exhibited a very clear baseline intention to participate in a cooperative, pro-environmental behavior.
They possessed the infrastructure, the municipality gave them the designated bags, and they understood the mechanism of the program.
Yet, the behavioral mystery at the center of the study is that a massive percentage of these highly intentioned households routinely failed to actually place their recycling bags on the street on collection day.
The intention was undeniably present, but the physical execution was completely absent.
Why? I mean, I always compare this to the classic New Year's gym membership phenomenon.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You sign up in January with the absolute best intentions. You buy the shoes, you have the schedule, but on a random Tuesday in March, you just don't go.
To understand this failure in the context of recycling, the researchers utilized behavioral economic theory to identify the exact friction points. Why does a low-stakes, intentional line behavior fail?
And the literature points to two primary psychological culprits, right? The first is limited attention, or basically just forgetting.
Let's break down the psychology of limited attention because it's so relatable. Human cognitive bandwidth is a finite resource.
especially in the context of a busy, chaotic urban life in a city of 10 million people.
Exactly. Processing the logistics of recycling requires executive function. It is not a frictionless task.
No, it's a hassle. You have to clean the containers, separate the materials, find a place to store them in your home.
And then you have to retrieve the specific episodic memory of the exact day and time the municipal truck serves your particular street.
It requires high cognitive load for a task with very low immediate salience.
Right. The friction is immediate. Washing out a sticky yogurt container is annoying, but the reward is abstract, delayed, and distributed.
You don't get to see the landfill physically shrinking just because you recycled one plastic bottle.
Therefore, the task is easily overwritten by immediate high salience demands, like running late for work, or getting the kids ready, or preparing a meal.
The individual simply forgets to execute the behavior in that one critical window of time when the truck is coming. The moment passes unnoticed.
The second cognitive bottleneck they identified is the lack of habit formation.
Which ties back to the gym analogy. If you haven't built a routine, every single recycling day requires a fresh exertion of willpower.
The mechanism driving that failure is what economists call hyperbolic discounting. Our brains heavily discount future rewards in favor of immediate comfort.
If you have to rely on conscious willpower every single Tuesday to override your desire to stay on the couch and instead gather the recycling, you will eventually fail.
Willpower is rapidly depleted. Habit formation is the neurological workaround for willpower depletion.
Right. When a behavior becomes habitual, it shifts from conscious, deliberative processing in the prefrontal cortex to automatic processing in the basal ganglia.
It requires minimal cognitive energy once it's a habit, but building that neural pathway requires consistent repetition over time.
So the researchers hypothesized that they could overcome this limited attention bottleneck and facilitate habit formation through a specific intervention.
A highly scalable, very low-cost intervention, sending automated mobile SMS text messages to the household on the morning of their specific collection day.
But, and here is where it gets really interesting, the researchers didn't just want to know if texts work. They wanted to know the exact recipe for making a habit stick.
The hypothesis is somewhat standard, but the methodology of this study is exceptionally rigorous.
Because in environmental behavioral studies, relying on self-reported data is notoriously problematic.
Oh, yes, due to social desirability bias. If a researcher asks a participant, "Hey, did you recycle last week?" The participant is highly likely to lie and say yes, just to project a positive self-image.
Nobody wants to admit to the researcher that they threw their plastic in the trash.
Exactly. So to eliminate that bias and secure objective data, the researchers physically tracked the behavior in secret.
This is my favorite part of the study. They literally deployed enumerators on bicycles to shadow the municipal recycling trucks along their routes.
It's brilliant. The enumerators cross-referenced the addresses of the enrolled households and directly observed whether a recycling bag was actually placed on the curb.
They gathered empirical behavioral data without the households ever knowing they were being actively monitored on a weekly basis.
So the experimental design spanned 12 weeks. Let's lay out the setup.
Okay, so the first phase, weeks 1 through 3, established the baseline.
Right. No interventions were applied during this time. The enumerators simply recorded the natural, unprompted recycling frequency of the cohort.
Following that baseline, the intervention phase commenced for the remaining 9 weeks. The researchers randomized the households into 4 distinct treatment arms.
They did this to isolate the effects of duration and continuity. So Group 1, which was the control group called TAO0 in the paper, received 0 text messages for the entire 12 weeks.
Group 2, the continuous group, or T1, received an SMS reminder every single week for the full 9 weeks of the intervention.
Group 3, the interrupted group, T2, received text for the first 3 weeks, and then the messages abruptly stopped for the final 6 weeks.
And finally, Group 4, the restarted Group T3. They experienced this burst, pause, burst structure.
Right, they received text for 3 weeks, experienced a 3-week silent period where they got nothing, and then the text resumed for the last 3 weeks.
This specific structure is designed precisely to test memory decay and habituation. So when they looked at the aggregate data, what was the top-line result?
The big win is that reminders absolutely work. The intervention yielded a statistically significant result.
Overall, across the aggregate data, receiving an SMS reminder generated a 4.7 percentage point increase in the probability of a household recycling compared to the control group.
And, a 4.7 percentage point lift might seem minor in an abstract sense, but in the context of municipal policy, it is substantial.
Definitely. I mean, the marginal cost of sending an automated text message is effectively zero.
Scaling a 4.7% increase across a city of 10 million people represents a massive tonnage of waste diverted from landfills with negligible municipal expenditure.
It demonstrates incredibly high policy efficacy. But wait, I have a question here.
Here.
Didn't people get habituation or just totally desensitized to the texts? I know that if an app sends me a push notification every single day, eventually my brain categorizes it as background noise. I just swipe it away without even looking. Did that happen here?
That is the assumption, right?
Yeah.
That bombarding a household with 9 consecutive weeks of recycling texts would trigger exactly this kind of habituation, rendering the texts useless.
But the data shows something different.
The data actually points to a much more complex cognitive process. Habituation did not occur in the aggregate. In fact, the continuous group, the ones who got texted every week, demonstrated the highest overall performance.
That's the aha moment. To understand the nuance of why, the researchers revealed this fascinating finding by segmenting the cohort based on their behavior during that initial 3-week baseline period.
Right. They looked at who responded to what treatment. They created 2 profiles. First, the baseline recyclers. These were households that placed a bag out at least once during the unprompted baseline phase.
So they already recycled occasionally. And the second group was the non-recyclers. Households that had signed up for the program but failed to recycle even once during those first 3 weeks.
And the behavioral response of these 2 groups to the different SMS schedules diverged entirely.
For the baseline recyclers, a short burst of reminders was highly effective.
Yeah, the interrupted treatment, just 3 weeks of text messages, was sufficient to significantly elevate their recycling frequency.
And more importantly, when the text messages ceased, their elevated recycling rates persisted.
The mechanism there is straightforward. These individuals already possessed the cognitive schema for recycling. They had already overcome the initial friction of washing and sorting the waste.
Their primary bottleneck was purely limited attention. They just kept forgetting which day the truck came.
Exactly. So a short 3-week burst of reminders functioned as a sufficient scaffold to lock the behavior into a routine. Once that neural pathway was reinforced, the external prompt wasn't necessary anymore.
But if we contrast that with the non-recyclers, for this group, the short 3-week burst of text messages yielded almost nothing. Zero statistically significant change in behavior.
They effectively ignored the prompts. If the researchers had concluded the study at week 6, they would have determined that SMS nudges are completely useless for entrenched non-participants.
But because they ran the continuous group for a full 9 weeks, they captured this massive delayed reaction.
Yes. For the non-recyclers receiving continuous texts, there was no behavioral change for the first month. But at week 6, the data shows a sudden, massive spike in the recycling rates.
It took a full 6 weeks of nonstop continuous text messages for these holdouts to finally break their inertia and put a bag on the street.
The researchers unpack what this means using the theoretical framework of attention stock.
Let's analyze attention stock deeply, because it really challenges the standard binary model of how we process reminders.
We tend to think of a reminder as a trigger. It either fires the behavior or it misfires and you ignore it.
Right, but the attention stock model posits that for high-friction, unestablished behaviors, the cognitive process is cumulative.
Each incoming text message does not necessarily aim to trigger an immediate action. Rather, it slowly deposits a unit of salience into the individual's cognitive reserve.
It's like a video game mana bar, slowly filling up. The message is processed, but the accumulated attention is not yet sufficient to overcome the physical and psychological friction of washing and sorting the recycling.
Exactly. It functions like a distributed lag model. The effect of the stimulus is spread over time.
The individual receives the text in week 1. They acknowledge it, but they are late for work, so they swipe it away. The salience increases slightly, though.
Week 2. They receive the text, they look at the unwashed plastic containers on the counter, the friction is just too high, they dismiss it.
But the attention stock is building. The concept of recycling is slowly moving from the periphery of their cognitive load toward the center.
Precisely. The baseline resistance to the task remains static, but the internal cognitive pressure, the attention stock, is compounding with every single message.
And by the 6th week of continuous prompting, the accumulated attention stock finally breaches the threshold required to override the behavioral friction.
The theoretical intention is converted into physical action.
The implications there are huge for policy design. It proves that a lack of immediate compliance does not indicate habituation or outright rejection,
No, the subject is internalizing the nudge. They simply require a higher dosage of salience to overcome their specific inertia.
which perfectly allows us to synthesize the findings of both of these papers.
Yeah, we have explored two vastly different scales of urban environmentalism today.
We started by looking at Cronenberg's critique of the macroarchitecture of the Capitalocene, how giant neoliberal economic systems dictate the physical boundaries, the maintenance, and the exclusionary nature of our city parks.
Commodifying nature and demanding high-tech, destructive maintenance.
And the proposed alternative is this community-driven, low-throughput degrowth model. A commons reliant on the decommodification of nature and the mobilization of cooperative, citizen-led civic labor.
But to achieve that utopian macrovision, we need micro-level behavioral tools. Rebel provides the microbehavioral mechanics required to actualize that civic labor.
We know that human intention is highly vulnerable to limited attention and willpower depletion.
But we also now possess empirical evidence that localized, persistent behavioral nudges can incrementally build attention stock, overcoming inertia to engineer new cooperative eco-habits in individuals who previously did nothing.
This convergence presents a fascinating and honestly a potentially deeply concerning avenue for speculation regarding the future of urban governance.
Let's explore that intersection as a final thought for the listener.
Cronenberg warns that municipalities often co-opt the language of community empowerment to justify neoliberal austerity.
Right. They want citizens to volunteer to clean the parks, simply so the city can cut the parks department budget and lower taxes for developers.
And Rabel proves that a municipality can effectively program citizen behavior using zero-cost automated psychological nudges.
So if we reimagine our city parks not as gated commodities but as collective commons, what happens when we merge the two?
We face the potential weaponization of behavioral economics. What if local governments used these highly effective, localized behavioral nudges not just for trash collection, but to actively extract free labor?
That flips the utopian vision entirely. Imagine getting a text that your local microforest needs raking this Saturday.
Imagine a municipality firing its unionized park maintenance staff under the guise of transitioning to a community-led feminist park model.
But to ensure the park doesn't actually degrade and lower adjacent real estate values, the city deploys a highly sophisticated, continuous algorithmic SMS campaign targeting the local residents.
The texts wouldn't just be reminders, they would be engineered guilt or social proof nudges. Your neighbors have cleared 50 pounds of invasive species from the microforest this week. It's your turn to contribute to the commons.
The city uses the psychological mechanics of attention stock to systematically drain the civic energy of its residents, exploiting the ethics of care to subsidize the municipal budget.
The citizens believe they are participating in an eco-feminist reclamation of the commons, when in reality they are being algorithmically manipulated into performing unpaid reproductive labor to maintain the property values of the surrounding neoliberal real estate.
It is the ultimate enclosure. They aren't just enclosing the physical space of the park. They are using behavioral nudges to enclose and extract the cognitive bandwidth and physical labor of the citizens.
The green growth machine doesn't disappear. It just outsources the labor to the community via text message.
That is a deeply unsettling application of the data.
It really is. But it perfectly illustrates why we must analyze both the systemic theories and the behavioral mechanics simultaneously. The tools that can build a radical, convivial city of the future are the exact same tools that can be utilized to optimize its extraction.
It demands profound critical awareness from all of us regarding exactly who is sending the nudge and who ultimately profits from the resulting behavior.
We will leave you to mull over that unmentioned thread. Take a critical look at the architecture of your local green spaces and perhaps pay closer attention to the behavioral friction dictating your own routines. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and maybe go set a reminder on your phone to take out the recycling.
This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently, and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end
A
on.
lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.